Shabbat Shalom. Ever since Monday night, when the nation witnessed 24-year-old Damar Hamlin's collapse on the football field, we've all been anxiously checking the news for updates on his condition. In a matter of minutes, viewers focus on the score, their fantasy teams, or the bets they had made on the game was shattered. The biggest game in Hamlin's career to date became the biggest nightmare, the biggest fight for his life. The game was one of the most anticipated of the season, Week 17, and with major implications for the playoffs. So maybe it makes sense that it took more than an hour for the league to officially suspend the game. Maybe we can chalk it up to a desire not to mess with the outcome of the entire season. Maybe. ESPN initially reported that there would be a brief pause, followed by the typical 5-minute warm-up period, and then the game would resume. The NFL has since denied that that decision was ever made, but the fact that that was even plausible, the fact that we could even believe that the game might continue mere minutes after Hamlin's life-threatening injury and collapse is scary. How do we balance the mentality of the show must go on with the sobering realization that some things are bigger than the show? In this case, the football game is the show, but we all have different versions of the show in our own lives. Our jobs, our hobbies, the vacations we've planned, the details that make up our lives, the things that feel important, and they are important, until the moment when suddenly they're meaningless. Many other NFL players have been sharing their thoughts and prayers for Damar Hamlin. Here's an interesting one from Baltimore Ravens guard Kevin Zeitler. It's part of the game. You have to keep on moving. It's kind of trained into you. From college on, someone goes down in practice, you literally just move the drill 10 yards up. You leave him, and you just keep moving forward. It's part of the machine-like part of the NFL. You have to keep going. You learn to accept that. For that brief moment, though, your humanity comes back to you. How easy it is to turn away, to just move the drill up 10 yards, to keep going, to say the show must go on. And it often takes a major, catastrophic event to wake us up to what is truly important. I am as guilty of getting caught up in the details as anyone. And I don't want to wait for an earth-shattering event to raise my awareness of what is really important. Because when we lose sight of what is really important, we make terrible decisions. Decisions like continuing to play a football game after a player has gone into cardiac arrest, or decisions like throwing one's brother into a pit and selling him into slavery, like we see in the Joseph story in the Torah. Another story of 11 men on the field, and whether they do or do not pause to note the humanity of another. We reach the end of that Joseph story this week. Earlier in Genesis, we read this horrifying story of Joseph's own brothers becoming so consumed by jealousy and sibling rivalry that they throw Joseph into a pit and sell him into slavery. Not a single one of them was able to stand up and say, "Hold on a minute, this is our brother." And sure, we're annoyed with him for talking about his dreams of superiority, but we're losing perspective here. This has crossed the line from brotherly teasing to life and death. Only Reuben stops the other brothers from murdering Joseph outright. But even he couldn't see that throwing Joseph into a pit and selling him into slavery was crossing the line, an outcome of having lost perspective. Many years later, the brothers have done teshuvah, their repentance, and they have grown and matured so that they can see the error of their ways. And they have all reconciled with a teary, emotional reunion. This week, we read about the brothers return home to Canaan to bury their father Jacob. There's a midrash from Genesis Rabbah, a collection of interpretations of the book of Genesis about this journey. According to the midrash, after they bury their father, Joseph turns off the road and wanders over to the pit that he remembers being thrown into by his own flesh and blood. The brothers see Joseph looking at the pit. We can only imagine what must be going through the brothers' minds. The midrash jumps right to their concern that Joseph hasn't truly forgiven them, a thought that must stem from overwhelming guilt. But I have to imagine that in addition to the guilt that they rightfully feel, there's a moment of pause, the pause that they weren't able to take the first time that they were at this pit, a moment of self-reflection, perhaps even bewilderment. Did we really do that? What were we thinking? How did we get so caught up in the petty drama of jealousy and sibling rivalry that we forgot what really mattered? Returning to the pit in this midrash must have been a powerful moment, a moment when the brothers' stomachs dropped as they came to terms with what they had done. It's not analogous to the moment of seeing the spot on the field where Hamlin went down. It's analogous to NFL officials seeing that spot on the field this coming week if they had not suspended the game on Monday night. It's a moment of realization that perspective was lost and a terribly wrong decision was made. The ideal, of course, is not waiting for the earth-shattering moment to bring us renewed perspective. But for so many of us, it takes one of those moments to see clearly. Years ago, I read the book Option B by Adam Grant and Sheryl Sandberg, and though the book is primarily about Sheryl Sandberg's earth-shattering moment when her husband died suddenly, it was a story about a major moment for organizational psychologist Adam Grant that has really stuck with me. Grant has been the top-rated professor at Wharton for 7 years straight. His classes always fill up quickly. How did he become so popular? One day, a student named Owen stopped by Grant's office to ask for help. Owen was always upbeat, but that day he seemed anxious. He said he was looking for an internship, and Grant offered to make a few introductions. Owen never followed up, and that was the last time they spoke. 2 months later, he died by suicide. Adam Grant feared that he had failed when it mattered most. From that moment on, he committed himself to thinking differently and more seriously about supporting his students, whether they seemed like they were struggling on the surface or not. For Grant, learning of his student's death by suicide was a miniature version of the moment of returning to the pit. Adam Grant didn't do anything terrible in that office visit, like Joseph's brothers. It was just a moment of realizing that he could shift his perspective to focus more on what really matters, his students' well-being. We live in a the show must go on world. We're constantly busy, constantly planning the next thing, constantly caught up in the details. There's nothing wrong with the details of life. It's only wrong when we allow ourselves to be so consumed by them that we cannot see beyond them. We should not wait for an earth-shattering event to recenter our perspective. As we continue to pray for Damar Hamlin's recovery, we also take stock of our own lives, ensuring that we never lose the forest for the trees, the human being for the football game, the brother's life for the jealousy. Shabbat Shalom.